In the heart of the desert, where the golden sands stretch endlessly beneath the watchful eye of Ra, the sun god, there stood a small village called Perhemset. Tucked near one of the quiet arms of the Nile River, the village was not grand or famous, yet its rhythm was eternal. Its people lived in gentle harmony with the rising sun and the slow, sacred pulse of the river. This is where our story begins, not with battles or pharaohs, but with stillness. And with a boy named Setka. Setka was the son of a scribe, and his days were filled not with plowing or fishing, but with listening to his father's soft voice as he recited the scrolls, to the wind as it traced secrets across the dunes, to the river's lullaby as it slipped by like time itself. The air in Perhemset was always warm, like the comfort of an old blanket. When Setka woke each morning, he would stretch slowly, hearing the rustle of palm leaves just outside the window. Birds, those sacred messengers of the gods, called to each other as the sun rose slowly, painting the walls of their home in honey and gold. Setka's father, Paser, believed in the quiet teachings of the land. "Write only what is needed," he would say with a smile, "and let silence say the rest." Their home smelled of papyrus, dried herbs, and the faint, sweet perfume of lotus flowers his mother kept in shallow clay bowls. There was no rush in the village. The hours unspooled like threads of linen, smooth, soft, and endless. Each morning, Paser and Setka would sit on the porch of their mud brick house, sipping warm water flavored with dates. The Nile shimmered in the distance, reflecting the early sky. On some days, they would watch crocodiles float like forgotten statues. On others, they would see women washing linen in the shallows, their laughter mixing with the breeze. But the most sacred moment of the day was dusk. At dusk, all of Perhemset slowed even more, if such a thing were possible. The sky turned the color of aged copper, and the first stars blinked into existence. It was then that Paser would bring out a faded scroll, older than even his own father, and read by oil lamp. The stories were not exciting. They were not meant to be. They were stories of patient gods, of sunlit temples, of farmers whispering thanks to the river. One story, Setka's favorite, was about a reed that grew near the mouth of the Nile. The reed wished to be useful and waited calmly for centuries until a priest plucked it and turned it into a pen. "Even the smallest reed," Paser would say softly, "can carry the wisdom of the stars." Setka would lie back, his hands behind his head, listening not just to the words, but to the silence between them. It was in that silence, he believed, that the gods truly spoke. As seasons passed, the boy grew, and so did his understanding. He learned to write in hieroglyphs, the ancient pictures that danced like dreams across the scrolls. He learned the names of plants that healed fevers, and which prayers to whisper when the moon was full. But his favorite days were the ones when the village did nothing at all. There were no festivals, no funerals, no errands, just the sound of linen drying in the breeze, the hum of insects in the reeds, and the low, ever-present murmur of the Nile. Setka would sit by the river, his feet in the cool water, and let his thoughts wander like the drifting lotus petals. Sometimes he imagined he could hear the voices of those who came before, not as words, but as feelings. Warmth, patience, peace. One evening, while sitting alone on a stone near the river, he met a woman named Nefret. She was older than Setka, perhaps by many years, though she moved with the grace of flowing water. She wore a simple white linen robe and carried a curved walking staff. "Are you the son of Passer?" she asked gently, her voice like wind through reeds. "I am," Setka replied, standing politely. "I knew your grandfather," she said, sitting beside him. "He once helped me find a lost ring in the sand. He told me that the desert forgets nothing, and neither should we." From that day on, Nefret would sometimes join Setka at dusk. She would bring dried figs and tell long, quiet stories, not of pharaohs, but of potters, weavers, and shepherds who lived with honor and calm. One story she told was of a potter who made a single bowl every month. He would shape it slowly, letting each curve follow the breath of the wind. His bowls were not famous, but every family in the village owned one. When he died, the village placed one of his bowls beneath the roots of a fig tree, and to this day, the tree grows sweeter fruit than any other. Setka listened to every word as though it were a song written in the stars. Years passed. The village changed little, as villages often do when they are truly content. Setka became a scribe like his father, though he wrote fewer words and spent more time watching the clouds. He taught children to write their names in sand, and he read to the elders when their eyes grew tired. He never traveled far, nor did he need to, because in his heart he believed what his father had once told him. Everything we seek is already here, in the river's song, the reed's patience, and the sand that remembers. And so, Perhemset continued quiet as a whispered blessing. The Nile flowed. The stars turned. And in the stillness of an ancient land, the story went on. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting the entire Nile valley in a soft amber glow. Papyrus reeds danced lazily at the river's edge, and the gentle breeze whispered secrets to the palms overhead. In the distance, the white limestone walls of the temple of Hatshepsut shimmered under the last golden threads of daylight, its silhouette almost floating above the quiet hush of the evening. Aset, the elderly scribe of Yunu, sat on a woven mat outside her modest home. Her fingers, though aged, still traced the edge of her ink pot with grace and purpose. By her side, little Beck, the curious child with a head full of dreams, leaned against her arm, eyes heavy with wonder. "Grandmother," Beck murmured, "why does the Nile never stop singing?" Aset chuckled gently, brushing a lock of hair from Beck's forehead. "Because, my little moonflower, the Nile has seen everything. Every story, every sorrow, every joy. It cannot help but whisper what it remembers." "Even the secrets of the gods?" Beck asked, voice barely more than a sigh. "Especially those," Aset whispered back, her eyes crinkling with the weight of memory. And so, as the stars blinked slowly into the indigo sky and the first night birds began their lullabies, Aset began another tale, one of olden times, when pharaohs dreamed in gold and the gods walked with mortals. Long ago, in a quiet village nestled between dunes and river, there lived a potter named Jet. He was neither rich nor powerful, but his hands were blessed with a gift few could rival. From clay and water alone, He shaped vessels so smooth and fine that they seemed to hum with life. People whispered that Maat herself had smiled upon his work. Jet lived a simple life with his daughter Nefru, whose laughter could brighten even the driest day. Each morning, they would walk together to the riverbank. Jet would collect clay while Nefru wove necklaces of lotus and papyrus. In the evenings, they shared dates, figs, and long, sweet silences under the moon. But one year the flood was late. The earth cracked with thirst, and the riverbed grew bones of dust. Villagers worried, eyes darting skyward with silent prayers. Jet watched the horizon, unsure how to tell Nefru that the clay was gone. Still, he rose early each morning and walked to the river, kneeling in the dust where water used to sing. And though his hands returned empty, he told Nefru stories of ancient kings and sacred cats, and gods who fished stars from the heavens. Nefru never cried. She listened, believing each word was magic. Then, one twilight, as Jet sat beneath a sycamore tree, a stranger appeared. Dressed in linen robes of dusk and gold, her face was veiled, but her eyes held the calm of the desert after rain. "I've heard of your vessels," she said softly. "They say they hold dreams." Jet bowed modestly. "I once shaped vessels, lady. Now I shape only silence." She reached into her robes and pulled forth a lump of clay, wet, fragrant, and cool as the Nile breeze. "Shape me one more, and in return I will gift your daughter the river's favor." He hesitated, unsure if this was a spirit or trick of hunger. But his fingers, as if remembering their true song, reached forward. That night, Jet worked with a reverence he hadn't felt in years. Under the moonlight, he shaped a jar unlike any before, wide, soft, perfect. When he handed it to the woman, she smiled beneath her veil. "Tell your daughter," she whispered, "that the river never forgets those who love it." By dawn, the stranger was gone, but so was the dust. Water trickled once more between the banks. The lotus bloomed again, and children squealed with joy as they splashed along the shore. Nefru, radiant and wild with wonder, found the river waiting for her necklace. She knelt beside it, dipped her hands into the coolness, and whispered thanks on behalf of her father. As the set finished the tale, Beck had long since drifted into sleep, his little head nestled against her shawl. The stars blinked brighter now, as if listening to their own memories of Jet and the stranger with eyes like still water. The Nile flowed quietly by, as it always had, carrying with it the weight of ancient stories and the promise of tomorrow. The days in Yuna passed gently, like sunlight across a smooth alabaster wall. The city, ancient even in its own time, breathed a rhythm of calm and continuity. The market sellers called out softly, not with urgency, but with practiced ease. Perfumed winds floated in from the fields, where oxen pulled plows through mud-black soil still moist from the river's recent return. In the quiet quarter where the palm trees leaned just so, Aset sat once more beneath the sloping shade of her awning, her woven mat warm with memory. She held her reed pen loosely, more ornament than instrument tonight, and her inkstone remained dry. Beck had returned, blinking sleepily and still full of questions, always questions. "Grandmother," he said, curling next to her with a sigh, Is it true that temples can sink into the sand? Aset smiled, her voice a lull of ripples in the evening hush. Ah, little moonflower, not only do they sink, but sometimes they sleep. And when they dream, the wind carries their breath into the ears of those who know how to listen. Beck's eyes fluttered open wider at that, but only a little. The comfort of his grandmother's voice, the scent of dried dates and warm water, all wrapped him in layers of peace. He said nothing, so she began. There was once, she said, in the days when the gods still walked along the edge of men's dreams, a temple so old that even the priests forgot who built it. It lay far from the cities, deeper than the river's reach, beyond the hills that curve like sleeping hippos. The desert had claimed it, swallowing its pylons and columns, burying its hymns beneath centuries of sand. But that temple, known only in whispers as Pernefru, the House of Beauty, was never forgotten by time itself. And so, when the stars aligned one summer night, the sands shifted. Just enough for a traveler to find it. His name was Cainwasit, a young architect from the House of Builders in Waysit, who had grown tired of walls and symmetry. He longed for something forgotten, something untouched by rules and royal decrees. And so, guided by dreams and the scratching of ibis quills on forgotten papyrus, he followed the wind. For 13 days he walked. By day, the sun beat upon his shoulders like an anvil. By night, the wind whispered through the dunes like a lover's sigh. And on the 14th dawn, when his skin was burnt and his sandals cracked, he saw it, a stone lintel jutting from the dunes like a memory pushing through sleep. It was just a piece, a carving, faded but still elegant, showing a lotus blooming from a sleeping woman's hand. Cainwasit dropped to his knees, brushing sand away like an old friend's tears. 1 hour passed. Then another. As the sun arched higher, more of the temple revealed itself, the top of a column, the suggestion of steps, and the faded remains of a wall that seemed to hum beneath his fingers. He made no camp that night. Instead, he sat before the ruin, speaking aloud, offering honey cakes and sips of date wine. And whether by spirits or by memory, the temple replied. Not in words, but in sensation. A warmth beneath his feet. A tremor in the air. A soft sigh as if stone were remembering how to breathe. And so began his work. Each morning he cleared sand. Each evening he slept with his head resting on the base of a half-buried statue. Weeks turned to months. Alone but never lonely, Cainwasit began to see faces in the carvings, kind eyes, gentle smiles, hands lifted not in power, but in welcome. One day, while uncovering what he believed to be a small chapel, he discovered a painted wall untouched by light for hundreds of years. It showed a procession, not of gods, not of kings, but of ordinary people, a woman grinding flour, a child chasing a cat, an old man sleeping beside a scroll. Beneath it, in the delicate, looping script of Middle Egyptian, read a phrase. To be remembered by peace is to live forever. He traced the words over and over again, their calm sinking deep into his soul. The temple, he realized, was not built for glory or fear or grandeur. It was a sanctuary of quiet, a place where stillness itself was sacred. The weeks passed like gentle clouds. Kamwaset no longer counted the days. He had become a part of the place. He slept in its arms, washed in its shadows, and when he awoke each morning, he no longer ached for cities or names. One evening, as the stars kindled overhead and the desert cooled, he felt the urge to climb the highest exposed pylon. It was a gentle climb, stone-worn smooth by time and wind. At the top, he sat cross-legged, the horizon stretching wide and empty. And there, just as sleep began to claim him, a figure appeared, not in flesh, but in shimmering moonlight. A woman, tall and robed in woven stars. Her eyes were deep wells of night, and her skin shimmered like polished ivory. "You have listened," she said. Kamwaset, though startled, did not speak. He bowed. "You have not carved your name, nor asked for treasure." He shook his head slowly. "You have only cleared the dust from forgotten memories. That is the truest kind of offering." She stepped closer, placing a gentle hand over his heart. "And so I give you what the restless cannot hold, peace that does not end." The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of blue lotus. The stars above shimmered a little brighter. And when Kamwaset blinked again, the figure was gone. He remained atop the pylon until dawn, then descended slowly. His movements were no longer hurried. He covered what he had uncovered brick by brick, protecting the temple as if tucking it back into bed. By the end of the moon's cycle, the desert had reclaimed it all. Only one stone remained visible, a single carved lotus in the sand. And Kamwaset? No one ever saw him again in Wazit or Yunu. But shepherds passing that region at dusk sometimes hear humming beneath the earth. And once, a young boy swore he saw a man sitting cross-legged atop a dune, staring lovingly at the stars. Back in Yunu, Beck had drifted into the warmest kind of sleep. Aset, watching over him, closed her eyes too, her hand resting softly on the boy's shoulder. And outside their home, the Nile whispered by, as steady as breath, as ancient as kindness. When the days in Yunu curled into one another like sleeping cats, and the shadows of the palm trees began to grow long and thin across the whitewashed walls, Aset often lit a single oil lamp just before sunset. Its flame danced without urgency, casting soft ripples of amber across her scrolls and baskets. Beck had returned from a short nap in the garden, his cheeks rosy with sun and sleep, his small hands still sticky with pomegranate juice. He climbed into her lap with the familiarity of a cat and laid his head upon her arm. "Grandmother," he whispered as if afraid to disturb the hush. "Do stories only live in temples?" Aset smiled, her eyes crinkling in that patient, reed-like way of the old. "No, little blossom. Some stories live in sand. Some live in stars. And some," she said, tapping gently on his forehead, "live here, waiting for someone to draw them out." Beck looked up, puzzled. "Draw them? Like a picture?" "Exactly like a picture," she said. "Have I told you of Pamu the scribe?" Beck shook his head, nestled deeper into her lap. "Then I shall tell you now." And so she began, voice a lullaby on the evening breeze. In the southern city of Kmunu, where the ibis birds gathered like scrolls come to life, there once lived a young scribe named Pamu. His name meant tomcat, for he was silent in his walk, soft in his voice, and had a gaze that always seemed to be watching the spaces between moments. But Pamu was unlike other scribes. He did not copy edicts or catalog taxes or record the weight of wheat. No, his scrolls were always full of dreams. He would sit in the quiet corners of the garden or by the banks of the Nile, read pen in hand, and draw pictures that had never happened, and yet somehow always had. A crocodile wearing a crown. A woman with the wings of a falcon feeding grapes to the moon. A lion curled up with a shepherd boy beneath a sycamore. Pamu's drawings were not precise, like temple art. They were soft and strange, as if memory and imagination had woven together like threads of papyrus. The other scribes, who worked diligently by daylight, often scoffed. "What is the purpose of these?" they'd say. "A drawing of a whisper? A sketch of silence?" But the children of Khmunu adored him. Every morning, just after the dew had lifted, they'd race barefoot to his shaded corner beside the lotus pool, giggling and chattering. "Draw my dream!" one girl would shout. "Make a picture of the time I flew with a kite," another would beg. And Pamu, smiling softly, would dip his pen and draw, never speaking, never correcting. His pictures always captured not what was seen, but what was felt. One day, as the air shimmered with the perfume of blooming henna and the bells of passing priests rang in the distance, Pamu was visited by a traveler. A tall woman with skin like the Nile in flood and eyes that flickered like distant torches. She watched him work silently for a long time, and only when he paused to sip his fig water did she speak. "You draw things that never happened," she said. Pamu nodded unfazed. "And yet," she continued, "they make me feel like I've remembered something I never knew I'd forgotten." Pamu looked up, surprised, for it was the first time anyone had said what he'd always hoped to hear. "Who are you?" he asked, voice like soft sand over stone. "I am called Nebuchadnezzar," she said, "but that is only one name among many. Some say I am a dream that lingers too long. Others call me the keeper of unfinished stories." She reached into the folds of her linen robe and pulled forth a scroll bound in silver twine. Its surface shimmered, not with gold or gem, but with something subtler, possibility. "This is the unwritten tale," she said. "Only one scribe may draw it. It cannot be read aloud. It cannot be copied. But those who see its pictures will sleep more deeply, dream more sweetly, and wake more kindly." Pamu took the scroll in reverent silence. Nebuchadnezzar vanished before the shadow of the sycamore shifted. From that moment on, Pamu's drawings changed, not in style, but in presence. They seemed to breathe, to hum softly when no one was looking. He filled the unwritten tale not with heroes or wars, but with scenes of stillness. A woman combing her child's hair beside a blue lotus pool. A fisherman returning empty-handed but smiling at the sky. A cat sitting beside a sleeping dog on the temple steps. He drew long into the night, sometimes pausing only to listen to the wind that passed through the reeds or to the hush of distant stars. And slowly, word spread. Travelers came from Janet and Mennefer, from the oases of the west and the turquoise mines of the east. Not to see statues, not to hear oracles, but to watch Pammy draw. He never asked for offerings, only silence, the kind that hums with presence. One evening, when the moon was thin and sharp like a reed tip, a little girl asked Pammy what he would draw if he had only one page left. He thought long and quietly. Then he took his pen and, with a few soft strokes, created an image so simple it made the child blink. It was her, sleeping peacefully, with the Nile behind her and a sky full of stars shaped like her favorite animals. She looked up at him with sleepy wonder. "Why this?" "Because," he said, "every person holds a universe inside. Sometimes, all you need is a drawing to remember how gentle it can be." Years passed. Pammy grew old, his hands spotted and slow, but his lines never wavered. When he could no longer sit in the garden, he lay in the shade, and the children drew for him. They did not copy. They listened to dreams, and drew them softly, as he had taught. And when at last Pammy fell asleep beneath the flowering tamarisk, a smile still on his face, the scroll of the unwritten tale closed itself. No one ever found it again. But in Kmunu, even now, children sometimes wake and tell their parents, "I dreamed of pictures that whispered." And the parents nod, smile, and know Pammy still draws and dreams. In a small village near the edge of the eastern desert, where the sand gave way to grasslands and the river carved slow, sleepy bends through groves of date palms, there once stood a forgotten temple. It was not grand like the sanctuaries of Yunu, nor vast like those of Wazit. It had no towering pylons or golden capstones. There were no carvings of battles or boasting pharaohs. No processions. No music. Yet it stood, nonetheless, low, white, and still, half sunk into the earth like an old thought resting beneath a pillow of time. No one knew quite who had built it. The villagers whispered that it was older than the stars, or perhaps younger than the first sigh of the Nile's spring flood. Some said it had been a place where gods had once come to nap. Others believed it had been constructed not by stoneworkers but by silence itself. In this quiet temple lived an old woman named Tepi, whose name meant the first. No one could recall if she had once been a priestess, or merely someone who had wandered in one day and never left. She never told anyone. She wore long linen robes the color of old clouds, her hair tied back with simple reeds. Her voice, when she used it, was softer than wind in dried papyrus leaves. But mostly, Tepi did not speak. She swept the temple's white steps every morning with a broom made from date fronds, her slow movements measured like the breath of statues. She polished the single bowl of green faience that sat in the center of the inner chamber. She lit a single stick of incense at dawn and one at dusk. And she always placed a small stone, smooth and round, on the offering table each day. A stone for stillness. A stone for thought. A stone for the unspoken. And then she sat. That was all. The villagers had grown used to her rhythm. At first, the children had been curious. They crept to the edge of the temple, giggling behind baskets, daring each other to tap the lintel or whisper her name. But the moment they entered the temple's shadow, their laughter would fall away like dried leaves. There was something there, not frightening but vast, like walking into the breath of something very old and very kind. When the children told their parents, the elders only nodded. "Yes," they said, "that is the quiet temple. It listens. It does not answer, but it listens." One day, during the season of inundation, when the water swelled the fields and the frogs sang like tiny green harps, a young man arrived from the north. His name was Sabu, a novice priest from Mennefer. He wore a fine linen kilt and a silver amulet shaped like those ibis. His feet were blistered from travel, but his eyes shone with purpose. "I have come," he said to the villagers, "to learn the secret of the silent temple. My master says no scroll can teach it. Only presence. Only experience." The villagers, used to quieter ways, simply pointed to the slope beyond the acacia trees. Sabu climbed the hill, full of questions and preparation. He had memorized prayers. He had read ancient hymns. He had studied the geometry of temples, the mathematics of offering, the divine logic of sacrifice. He stepped inside. Tepi was sweeping. She looked up and nodded once. Then she returned to sweeping. Sabu bowed deeply. "Revered one, I seek knowledge." Tepi placed her broom aside. She motioned to a low bench near the eastern wall. He sat straight-backed, full of reverence. She did not speak. The wind moved across the temple stones. A pigeon cooed in the rafters. Time passed. A breeze stirred the incense. Nothing more. Sabu coughed softly. "I brought you an offering," he said, placing a small scroll on the stone floor beside her. It was bound in gold thread and inscribed with a prayer to Jehudi, the scribe of the gods. Tepi looked at it. She smiled. But she did not touch it. Sabu waited. He waited until the incense turned to ash, until the shadows of the date trees lengthened and curled like ancient script across the walls. Still, she said nothing. He returned the next morning, and the next, and the next. Each day she swept. Each day she polished. Each day she placed a stone. Each day she invited him to sit. And in time, Sabu began to let go of his rehearsed speeches. He stopped trying to prove his knowledge. He stopped asking questions. He began to listen. He listened to the way the incense whispered as it burned. He listened to the small chirp of a gecko as it darted across the stone lintel. He listened to the way his own breath echoed in the chamber, rising and falling like the Nile. And slowly, something began to change. He noticed how the morning light slipped through the doorway at a different angle each day, tracing a quiet dance across the floor. He noticed how the bowl of green faience always seemed to hold a glimmer, even in deepest shade. He noticed how the silence inside the temple was never empty, but filled with things he had never heard before, thoughts that had not yet become words, feelings too gentle to speak. On the seventh day, as he sat beside Tepi in the still chamber, he whispered, "I think I understand." She smiled, eyes full of the moon. "But I don't know how to explain it." She placed a small stone in his hand. It was smooth and warm. "No need," she said, voice like cloth on stone. Not all knowledge is spoken. Sabu stayed a while longer, not to learn more, but to remember better. And when he left, he carried no scroll, no relic, only the small stone. When he returned to Men-Nefer, his voice was softer, his walk slower. His students noticed how he listened more than he spoke, how his temple became known not for its chants, but for its hush. Years later, when he was an old man and the palm trees near his sanctuary swayed like dreams, he would sometimes show visitors the stone. "This," he'd say, "was given to me by a woman who taught me the hardest lesson of all." They would lean in, expecting some secret incantation. But Sabu would simply say, "She taught me how to listen to what has no sound." Back in the quiet village, the temple still stood. Still white. Still still. Tepi still swept, still polished, still placed her stones. And sometimes, when the sun was low and the world seemed made of honey and hush, children would gather near the steps, sitting silently, waiting for something. Tepi would give each one a small stone, and they, too, would learn to listen. Far to the south of the river bends and lotus pools, beyond the shade of sycamores and the hum of temple chants, there was a land where the sand stretched like a golden ocean. Dunes rose and fell in slow motion, sculpted by the whisper of wind. No trees, no birds, only the endless sky, the sigh of the earth, and the shimmering silence. In this vast hush of the desert lived an old man named Khufu-Mhotep, known by the few who remembered him as the Sand Scribe. No one knew if that was truly his name or one given to him by time, for he lived alone in a small sandstone hut near the edge of a forgotten wadi. His walls were smooth and plain, marked only by the shifting shadow of a sundial and the soft trace of reed mats. He wrote not with ink, but with his finger in sand. Each morning, he rose with the breath of Ra, the sunlight sliding across his face like a warm hand. He sat cross-legged on a stone slab beside his doorway and waited for the wind. When the breeze was just right, not too bold, not too faint, he would smooth the patch of sand before him and begin. Not words, not letters, but lines, curves like river bends, dots like birds in flight, spirals like sleeping snakes. They were not meant to be read, only felt. And when the wind returned, as it always did, it would carry the writing away, gently scattering his morning thoughts across the endless desert like prayers whispered to no one in particular. Khufu-Mhotep believed that the desert listened. He believed that each grain of sand held a memory of what had once been, and that if one listened long enough, one might hear the dreams of stones. Some called him mad, a hermit, a relic, but the desert called him kin. It was on a particularly quiet morning, when the sun's light was the color of barley and the dunes lay sleeping under a veil of silence, that a young girl appeared on the horizon. Her feet were dusty, her braid loose. A small satchel hung from her shoulder, and in her eyes, uncertainty. She did not speak at first, only stood on the edge of the hut's shadow. Khufu-Mhotep glanced up and smiled, his face wrinkling like old papyrus. "You are far from the sound of sandals and markets," he said, brushing a swirl into the sand. The girl looked down. I heard there was a man who writes with wind. He chuckled, the sound dry and kind. Some say that, yes. Others say I am simply old and sun-touched. She stepped closer. I'm looking for something, but I don't know what. He nodded. Good. That means you are ready to find it. She sat across from him, mirroring his posture, her knees tucked beneath her linen robe. The sand between them was still. What do you write? She asked. He traced a slow circle. What the desert tells me. Can it speak? She asked. He smiled again. Can you listen? She frowned, unsure how to answer. And so he said no more. Instead, he smoothed the sand and gestured for her to try. The girl hesitated, then slowly dragged her finger across the soft ground. She drew a crooked sun, a crooked house, a figure with stick arms. Khufuemhotep nodded solemnly. A beginning. The wind picked up. The lines danced and blurred, then vanished. Gone, she whispered. No, he said softly. Given. That afternoon, they did not speak much. She watched him draw. He watched her observe. Together, they listened to the wind. At night, under a sky thick with stars, so many stars that they looked like grains of sand suspended in the heavens, they lay on their mats and watched the constellations breathe. There, he pointed. That is the crook of the shepherd. It looks like a hook, she said. Yes, he nodded. It's how he gathers the lost dreams. She was quiet a while. Do you have a name? She asked. I have many, but for now, call me Khufu. I'm Rami. He nodded, closing his eyes. Then may the dunes know your name. The next morning, Rami drew again. This time, her finger traced a path, a winding trail leading up a dune, past a tree, to a small house. My dream, she said. I had it last night. Khufuemhotep examined it carefully. And what was at the end of the path? She looked at the blank edge of the sand. I never got there. Then we will try again tomorrow. And so, for days that turned to weeks, they sat in the dawn, drew in silence, and spoke in slow murmurs. Rami began to notice the shapes of the dunes, how some looked like sleeping lions, others like the curve of an old mother's back. She began to hear the language of the wind, not as words, but as movement, rhythm, breath. One morning, a caravan passed on the far edge of the wadi. The camels groaned, and the traders shouted as they hurried across the sand. One called out, Old man, why waste your time scratching in dust? Khufuemhotep did not answer. Rami wanted to shout back, to defend him. But he smiled at her and whispered, The desert does not shout. It waits. And she understood. One night, Rami dreamed again of the winding path. This time, she reached the end. There, at the edge of the trail, was a mirror. But when she looked into it, she saw not her face, but the vastness of the desert, and in its center, a swirl drawn in sand. She woke before dawn and drew it in front of Khufuemhotep. He studied it, his eyes wide with something like joy. You have seen it, he whispered. The place where thought begins. That day, the wind did not blow. The sand drawings remained, and Khufu-Imhotep did not draw. He only watched. Rami, he said that evening, as the stars blossomed one by one in the sky, you must go. She looked at him, startled. Go where? To the place beyond the dune in your dream. You are ready. But I don't know what's there. Exactly. She looked down at the sand, the spiral still unblurred by wind. Will I come back? If you do, you will not be the same. Rami packed her satchel. She took only a small flask of water, a piece of charcoal, and a bit of linen. Before leaving, she smoothed the sand one last time and drew a spiral within a circle. For you, she said. Khufu-Imhotep touched her shoulder gently. May your steps be as soft as whispers. And she walked into the desert, her footprints fading behind her like sighs. The old sand scribe sat in the silence once more. He did not draw that day. He only listened. And for the first time in many years, he smiled and said aloud to the wind, Thank you. Some say Rami found a temple carved into a dune, where dreams were stored in jars sealed with beeswax. Others say she became a wanderer, teaching children how to draw their dreams in sand. And still others believe she returned, many years later, under a new name, to sit beside Khufu and draw in silence. But the desert remembers. It always remembers. And if you ever find yourself walking alone under a golden sky, with nothing but wind and time for company, you may find a smooth patch of sand marked by spirals, circles, and lines. Stop. Sit. Listen. Perhaps, just perhaps, you'll begin to understand what the desert has always tried to say. The desert morning drifted in gently, brushing the dunes of Saqqara with golden light. The sands whispered as the wind moved slowly across their surface, curling around broken stones and the time-worn pillars of forgotten temples. The air was warm but still held the cool breath of night, a soft, comforting presence like the embrace of a linen sheet on a summer morning. Mini stirred beneath the shade of an acacia tree. Beside him, Nanu the cat lay curled, eyes still closed, purring softly. The soft purring seemed to harmonize with the breeze, a low hum echoing through the desert as if the land itself was dreaming. He sat up, slowly stretching his arms toward the pale sky. His journey had led him far already, and yet the dreams still tugged at his heart, visions of ancient scrolls hidden beneath the sands, of a forgotten name that lingered in the silence of stone. The Scribe of Stars. That was the name that returned to him again and again. But was it a person, a place, or an idea? Breakfast was simple: dates, honey bread, and a sip of fig wine from a clay flask. He shared a piece of bread with Nanu, who mewed approvingly, then patted ahead as if leading the way. Together they walked eastward, guided by the shifting light and the memory of a half-crumbled pillar where old tales were once carved. As they walked, the landscape changed. The smooth dunes began to give way to scattered ruins and low stone walls that hinted at ancient courtyards and once busy marketplaces. Eventually, they came to a small, square structure made of limestone blocks. Its roof was gone, open to the sun, and vines had crept across the broken threshold. A faded carving above the entrance depicted a seated figure holding a long scroll, eyes raised, not to read but to observe the stars. Menes paused. This was it. This was the place from his dream. He entered slowly. The air inside was cooler, shaded. Dust hung in golden beams of light. Along the walls, carvings ran like stories unrolling on papyrus. Lions and ibis, scribes with inked fingers, and stars carefully drawn with symmetrical lines. In the center of the chamber sat an old man. He was cloaked in linen the color of desert moonlight, and his hair, though gray, flowed like papyrus fibers. His eyes opened as if he had expected Menes all along. "You walk with dreams," the old man said, voice soft as parchment. "You seek the keeper's truth." Menes bowed slightly, uncertain of the proper etiquette. "I follow what I do not yet understand," he admitted. "Something ancient calls to me." The old man smiled. "You do not need to understand it all at once. Truth, like ink, needs time to dry." He gestured for Menes to sit, and with a careful motion, unrolled a scroll from a clay jar beside him. The parchment was so old it seemed woven from memory itself. The writing was fine and steady, the language of old scholars, and between the lines, tiny star maps danced in miniature constellations. "This," he said, "is the song of the quiet sky. It was written not with the intent to record but to remember. These stars, they guided not ships nor soldiers, but thoughts, ideas, dreams, the kind that whisper when the world sleeps." Menes leaned closer. The script was delicate and swirled in peaceful loops. Each word felt like it belonged to another time, yet it stirred something in him. Memories of stories his grandmother once told him, of stars that listened and winds that spoke in riddles. "Can you read it?" he asked. The old man chuckled softly. "You already are. Not with your eyes, but with your stillness." They spent the day in gentle conversation. No hurry, no pressure, just the slow unraveling of a story shared across generations. The keeper, as Menes now thought of him, told tales of the first scribes who wrote not to preserve power but to calm their hearts. He spoke of temples built not for kings, but for silence. Scrolls inked not in haste but with breaths between every stroke. By midday, Menes felt no urgency to move on. The keeper brewed a tea from desert herbs and offered a dish of preserved figs. Outside, Nanu chased a sunbeam and then dozed in a basket made of woven reeds. Evening came quietly. Shadows lengthened across the sand. The chamber grew cool again, the breeze carrying the perfume of myrrh and distant water. Lanterns were lit, small oil lamps in the corners of the room, casting golden halos on the scrolls. The keeper handed Menes one final parchment. "This one," he said, "is not written yet. It is yours." The scroll was blank, soft, and inviting. "For what purpose?" Menes asked. "To listen," the keeper replied, "and in time to write." That night, Menes lay beneath the stars once more, a soft linen blanket drawn to his chest, Nanu curled against his side. The dreams that visited him were no longer strange or disjointed. They were calm, deliberate, a slow unfolding of understanding. He dreamed not of kings or battles or treasures, but of quiet ink strokes and ancient hands writing by lamplight. He dreamt of scrolls carried by the wind and buried beneath trees planted in silence. He dreamed of peace, not as a place, but as a rhythm. The keeper's voice echoed one last time before sleep claimed him. To walk the sands is to stir the past, but to sit, to breathe, to listen, is to belong to it. The dawn was soft, a veil of golden light stretching across the desert sky. Not a cloud interrupted the vast canvas above, only a quiet hush, as if even the wind wished to speak softly this morning. Menes awoke slowly, his body wrapped in the comfort of the linen blanket the keeper had given him. Nanu, ever attentive, was already sitting nearby, tail curled neatly over her paws, eyes fixed on the horizon with feline grace. The world felt unusually still, not empty, but full in a quiet way, like a pause between the verses of a lullaby. He stretched with deliberate ease, allowing the moment to unfurl without rush. The scent of the keeper's tea, a gentle mix of hibiscus and desert mint, lingered in the air, as though the old man had brewed it in his sleep. Menes sat up and found, just beside the scroll he had been given the night before, a cup waiting for him. Warm, fresh. The keeper had been there, or perhaps still was. Menes stood, his feet brushing the cool stone floor of the scriptorium. The old chamber was bathed in soft light, and though there was no sign of the keeper himself, the room felt far from empty. It felt lived in, watched over, cared for. He wandered slowly to the scrolls once more. Some had been rolled neatly back into jars, others still open, their ink glyphs glowing faintly in the slanted morning sun. He reached for one and gently read aloud a line he could understand. What lies beneath the sand is not always buried. The phrase echoed in his chest like a memory he had not yet made. Nanu padded up beside him and flicked her tail, meowing once. Menes looked down at her and smiled. "You want to go," he said softly, as though the answer had been whispered to him. "Further still." She purred in agreement and began walking toward the open threshold. Menes took one last look at the chamber. He gathered the blank scroll, rolled it carefully, and placed it in a leather pouch at his side. With a bow of thanks, he stepped outside. The desert welcomed him again. It was not harsh. It was not demanding. It simply was. The wind picked up gently, lifting a swirl of dust and casting tiny grains like flecks of gold through the air. He followed Nanu across a low ridge and into a small valley flanked by smooth dunes. As they descended, the sand changed color subtly, from bright gold to a deeper, warmer hue, almost like aged papyrus. Stones protruded here and there, and faint remnants of old pathways emerged, nearly invisible but still present beneath the weight of time. As he walked, Menes noticed the faintest sound beneath his feet. It was not the crunch of sand or the whisper of wind. It was softer, subtler, like the trickling of water under stone. He paused, listened, took a few more steps. Yes, there it was again. A memory stirred, one his mother had told him as a child, of the sacred springs that once flowed beneath Saqqara, rivers that were not of water but of knowledge, winding through chambers and scroll rooms deep below the earth. Menes knelt and placed his hand to the sand. Coolness greeted his palm. Not cold, just cool enough to surprise. He brushed aside the top layer and felt stone beneath it, smooth, carved, intentional. A pattern. He cleared more with his hands and uncovered a circular hatch, marked with a spiral of lotus petals. At its center was an indentation shaped like a star. He touched it gently. Nothing happened. He sat beside it and waited, unsure of what to do. Nanu lay down next to him, curling her tail around her paws, untroubled by the mystery. Perhaps, Menes thought, this was not a door to be opened by force. Perhaps it was a place to sit, to listen. He closed his eyes. Minutes passed, or hours. He breathed slowly, deeply. His thoughts slowed with his breath, and time seemed to pause around him. And then it shifted. A soft vibration beneath his legs. A sound like a sigh, deep and ancient. The hatch shimmered faintly, then rotated slowly, spiraling inward with no sound save the whisper of moving sand. The center receded and revealed a narrow staircase descending into shadow. Menes looked at Nanu. She yawned. "I'll take that as agreement," he whispered. With careful steps, he entered the passage. The air below was cool and dry, scented with stone, old ink, and myrrh. Oil lamps lined the stairwell, lighting themselves with faint blue flames as he passed. The descent was gentle but steady, taking him far beneath the dunes until the sunlit world above felt like a memory. At the bottom of the stairs, he stepped into a vast chamber. He gasped softly. Before him was a great underground river, not of water, but of light. It flowed between stone banks like melted moonlight, slow and serene. Along the sides of the river were small boats, carved from pale wood, their sails translucent like dragonfly wings. And there were scrolls, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, stacked neatly in shelves along the walls. Each seemed to glow faintly, humming with unread thoughts. The chamber pulsed with stillness. At the river's edge, a figure stood waiting. It was the keeper. Only now, he wore robes of midnight blue stitched with silver stars, and his eyes glimmered like reflections on still water. "I wondered when you would arrive," he said with a smile. Menes bowed deeply. "What is this place?" "The stream of remembering," the keeper replied. "Here flow the dreams of those who listened. Not all made it this far. But you did." Menes walked to the edge of the light river. It was warm near the surface, shimmering with colors he couldn't name. He reached out, but the keeper gently stopped him. "It is not to be touched," he said kindly. "Only reflected upon." "Reflected?" The keeper gestured, and the river stilled completely, turning mirror-like. Menes saw his own face at first, tired but peaceful. Then, images began to appear, soft, like memories behind fogged glass. He saw himself as a child, listening to stories by firelight. He saw his father's quiet smile as they watched the stars. He saw dreams he had once forgotten, of scrolls he had wished to write, thoughts he had abandoned in the rush of life. Each image floated past on the river, one after another, until at last he saw something he could not name, a future not yet lived. A room of his own, filled with scrolls and warm light. A cat curled on a cushion. Silence. Peace. Purpose. When the images faded, the river resumed its soft motion. Meanie sat down beside it and simply watched. "I don't know if I understand," he said quietly. "Good," said the keeper. "Understanding is not the goal." Meanies nodded. They sat in silence, the river whispering stories older than time. And when sleep finally found Meanies, curled beside Nanu beneath the glowing shelves of ancient thought, it was the deepest, gentlest rest he had ever known. It was a sleep deeper than Meanies had ever known. No dreams stirred. No voices whispered. Only the hush of breath, the soft rhythmic beat of something ancient cradling him gently in the dark, and the warmth of Nanu's fur resting against his arm. When he awoke, it wasn't with the abrupt jolt of a new day, but rather the soft blooming of awareness. His eyes fluttered open slowly, like lotus petals stirred by a morning breeze. Overhead, the stone ceiling of the subterranean chamber stretched wide and domed, painted in celestial blues and constellations. Tiny golden stars had been meticulously inlaid across the arch like grains of sand arranged one by one. The river of light still flowed silently beside him, not disturbed by time nor presence. Meanie sat up. Nanu gave a lazy stretch, her limbs extending long before curling once more beside him, thoroughly unbothered by whatever sacred mystery they now inhabited. She purred without a care. Meanies turned to look for the keeper. The figure in midnight blue robes was once again standing quietly at the far side of the chamber, this time holding something in his hands, a tablet of ancient wood, weathered and smooth, and a stylus tipped with bronze. "You rested well," the keeper said, not as a question, but as a kind confirmation of what was already known. Meanies nodded. "It was quiet," he said, "but not empty. That is how the deep places of the soul often feel," the keeper replied. He beckoned gently, and Meanies rose to meet him. The tablet in the keeper's hands bore a single glyph, the Eye of Horus. "You have seen your reflections," the keeper continued. "Now you must begin recording them." Meanies hesitated. "Recording them?" The keeper handed him the tablet and stylus. "The archive of echoes," he said, gesturing toward a chamber Meanies hadn't noticed before, an arched doorway behind a veil of light mist, softly glowing like the moon behind linen. "It waits for those who have seen, listened, and chosen to remember." Meanies took a step toward it, and the veil shimmered, parting like smoke. The room inside was circular, its walls made not of stone but of carved alabaster, smooth and luminous. Along the walls were narrow alcoves, each holding a scroll or tablet, and above each one, an inscription in glyphs so fine they looked sewn into the stone. There was no dust. There was no decay. It was as if time had politely stopped at the threshold. "This is where thoughts become echoes," the keeper said, stepping beside him. "And echoes become maps. For others. For yourself." Meanies looked at the blank tablet in his hands. His reflection stared back from its polished surface. I'm not a scribe, he said softly. The keeper smiled, deeply and kindly. Nor was the first flame a candle, he replied, but it lit the world nonetheless. Something shifted in Nini's. Not like a decision, more like an unlocking. He sat down before an empty alcove, and the stylus felt strangely natural in his hand. He began to write, not with effort, not with struggle, but with the quiet ease of someone remembering something they had always known but never dared to speak aloud. The first words were simple. I am Menes, son of quiet stars and forgotten roads. I once wandered without a question. Now I am full of them. He didn't try to write like a scholar. He didn't mimic the sacred texts or the great sayings of the wise. He simply poured what had been stored quietly in the deep jars of his heart, memories, sensations, curiosities. The feeling of wind on a temple's edge. The quiet pride of his father's calloused hand. The grief of loss he had never spoken aloud. The peace of sitting beside a cat who needed nothing explained. And slowly, the tablet began to glow faintly, as if the words themselves carried warmth. When the first entry was done, the keeper stepped forward silently and took the tablet from Menes with reverence. He placed it gently into the alcove, and as it settled into place, the glyphs above the niche shimmered into view. They read, First voice of listening. Menes stared, unsure what to say. The keeper only nodded and gestured to the chamber beyond. You may continue if you wish, or you may leave. Menes looked to Nanu. She was already padding forward, tail swaying gracefully, clearly expecting he would follow. He smiled. I'll stay. A while longer. The days, if they could be called such in that timeless place, passed gently. Each morning, or what passed for morning in that soft-lit world, Menes would wake, stretch, share a quiet moment with Nanu, and begin to write. Some days he would sit in silence for hours before a single word came. Others, his hand flowed steadily like the Nile itself. The keeper never rushed, never praised, never instructed. He simply remained, present, still, supportive. Sometimes, Menes would walk along the river of light, following its bends through corridors that opened into other quiet rooms. Some contained old clay vessels. Others faded murals of rituals and stars. One chamber held nothing at all but a single, polished stone at its center, radiating a soft warmth like breath. And everywhere he went, he listened. To silence. To thought. To memory. To the ancient presence that lived in the hush. He learned to feel the hum beneath the stone, the rhythm of the archive's heartbeat. He learned the value of slow thought. He learned the shape of his own mind. And he wrote, scroll after scroll, not for fame, not for acclaim, just to say, I was here. I felt. I heard. One day, as he sealed his latest scroll and placed it into its waiting alcove, he noticed that the glyph above it had formed before the scroll was set in place. It read, The one who remembers. That evening, as he lay down beside the now purring Nanu, he asked aloud into the stillness, How will I know when it is time to leave? The keeper, seated across the river, responded without turning. You will not want to, he said. But you will know. Meanies closed his eyes and felt a deep stillness settle in his bones. Not sleep yet, but a peace like it, like the edge of a great dream. The days stretched softly ahead like the endless sands outside the sacred chambers, timeless and serene. Meanies found himself less bound by hours and more by the gentle rhythms of his own breath and thought. The archive had become a sanctuary, not just for the words he wrote, but for the quiet transformation unfolding within. Each scroll he completed felt like a step deeper into a forgotten garden, where thoughts could grow freely, unchained by the noisy demands of the world above. On one such day, Meanies rose from his seat and followed the river of light with Nanu padding quietly at his side. The keeper was waiting near a threshold Meanies had not yet crossed, a carved doorway, decorated with symbols of the sun and the moon entwined in a delicate dance. This path, the keeper said, voice calm as the desert night, leads to the Hall of Mirrors. Meanies' curiosity stirred gently, like the flutter of a bird's wing. He stepped forward, the air growing cooler, the light dimming to a silvery glow. Inside the hall, tall reflective pillars rose like ancient trees made of glass. Each surface shimmered faintly, not with their own light, but reflecting something beyond. Memories, dreams, possibilities. Look, said the keeper, gesturing toward the closest pillar. Meanies peered, and the glass rippled like water. Slowly, images emerged, moments from his past, captured in tender detail. His mother's smile, the dusty market streets of his childhood, the soft hum of the temple bells. Then, the pillars shifted to show moments he had not known, imagined lives he might have lived, paths he might have taken. Each reflection is a whisper of what was or what might be, the keeper explained. But true understanding comes not from choosing one, but from embracing the whole. Meanies watched, feeling a calm acceptance bloom inside him. The hall was not a place of judgment but of gentle clarity, a place to see himself, not as a fixed statue carved from stone, but as flowing water shaped by time. Nanu brushed against his leg, and he smiled down at her, grateful for the quiet companion who needed no words. When he left the hall, the keeper handed him a new tablet, smaller and lighter than the ones before. This one is for your questions, the keeper said softly. Meanies took it, feeling its smooth surface warm to his touch. He realized then that the archive was not only a place to remember but a place to wonder. With a deep breath, he settled back at his alcove, the stylus poised, ready to write the questions that had gathered quietly in his heart, knowing that even unanswered, they held their own gentle light. Meanies sat quietly by the flickering oil lamp, its golden glow casting long shadows over the smooth surface of the new tablet. The questions he had gathered were delicate, like fine grains of sand slipping through his fingers, elusive but persistent. He dipped the stylus into ink and began to write, each stroke a soft whisper in the silence. Who am I beyond these words and memories? He wrote. What does it mean to live fully, not just to exist? How do I carry the weight of knowledge without losing the lightness of wonder? As the ink dried, the air around him seemed to shift, the room growing cooler, and a gentle breeze stirred the cloth that draped the alcove. Nanu curled at his feet, eyes half closed, peaceful. The keeper's voice came from the shadows, calm and steady. Questions are the seeds of growth, meanies. Do not fear them. Let them root deep within you, and in time they will bloom into understanding. Meanies nodded slowly, feeling a soft warmth spread through his chest, a quiet reassurance. Over the days that followed, he found himself more attuned to the rhythms of the archive. The ancient walls no longer felt like cold stone, but like the steady heartbeat of a living being, patient, eternal, watching. He would rise with the dawn's first light, tracing the delicate patterns of hieroglyphs as they caught the sun's gentle fingers. Then, in the quiet afternoon, he wandered the shaded courtyards, where date palms swayed softly and the scent of lotus blossoms lingered like a sweet memory. Each evening, the stars above Saqqara twinkled with a clarity that seemed to speak directly to his soul. He marveled at the constellations, wondering how the ancients had found stories in the night sky and how those stories had shaped their world. One night, as the moon carved silver paths across the sand, Meanies dreamt of a great river, its waters shimmering with fragments of light, carrying voices and laughter from faraway times. He awoke with a start, a feeling both new and familiar, as if the river in his dream was a bridge between what was and what could be. The next morning, the keeper approached with a gentle smile. "Your dreams are telling you something, Meanies. The archive is not just a place of memory, but a place of connection." Meanies looked up, curiosity bright in his eyes. "Connection?" "Yes," the keeper replied. "Between past and future, between self and other, between knowledge and heart." With renewed purpose, Meanies resolved to explore not only the words of the archive but the spaces between them, the silence, the pauses. The spaces where meaning lives in the waiting. And so, the slow unfolding continued, like the petals of a desert flower opening to the dawn, quiet and sure. As the days lengthened and the sun traced its slow arc over the desert, Meanies found himself drawn deeper into the mystery of the archive. It was not only a treasury of words but a sanctuary for the soul, a place where time bent gently, folding the distant past into the present moment. One afternoon, while tracing the delicate curves of an ancient papyrus scroll, Meanies noticed a faint scent drifting through the air, frankincense and myrrh, mingling with the dry earth and the distant whisper of the Nile. It was a fragrance that seemed to carry stories untold, memories just beyond reach. Following the scent, Meanies stepped into a hidden chamber he had not seen before, tucked away behind a heavy curtain of woven linen. The chamber was small and cool, walls covered in intricate paintings of gods and mortals, animals and stars. At the center stood a low stone altar, where offerings of grain and wine had been left long ago. Meanies knelt and reached out to touch the smooth surface of the altar. His fingers trembled slightly as if awakening something ancient and alive beneath the stone. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the stillness enfold him like a gentle cloak. In that quiet moment, the stories of those who had come before whispered softly in his mind, tales of courage and kindness, of loss and hope, woven through the ages like threads of gold. Meanies felt a warmth grow within him, a quiet assurance that he was part of a vast and unfolding story. As twilight deepened outside, Menes returned to his quarters with the soft glow of the lamp guiding his steps. He sat by the window, watching the stars bloom in the indigo sky, each one a distant beacon in the vast silence. He thought of the river in his dream, its waters carrying voices and laughter through the night. He understood now that the archive was not just a place to remember, but a place to listen, to the past, to the present, and to the possibilities yet to come. And so, with a heart both steady and open, Menes embraced the slow, gentle unfolding of his journey, finding peace in the quiet rhythms of the silent sands. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm golden light upon the desert's endless expanse. Menes awoke with a sense of calm resolve, as though the whispers of the archive had settled deep into his soul overnight. He wrapped himself in a linen cloak, its soft fabric comforting against the early chill, and stepped outside his humble abode. The village around him was stirring, farmers preparing their tools, women fetching water from the Nile, children laughing as they chased one another through the dusty streets. Yet, for Menes, the world felt different today. The air seemed to hum gently with unseen energy, the very stones beneath his feet alive with ancient memory. He walked toward the temple complex once more, eager to return to the hidden chamber, and the stories waiting to be uncovered. As he passed through the grand entrance, the towering columns carved with images of gods and pharaohs greeted him like old friends. The scent of incense and crushed herbs filled the air, mingling with the faint rustle of papyrus scrolls stacked neatly on wooden shelves. Within the chamber, Menes found a new scroll laid out as if waiting for him. The script was delicate, the ink slightly faded but still vibrant against the soft fibers of the papyrus. Carefully, he began to read, his eyes tracing the flowing lines of an ancient poem, a hymn to the river that nourished their land, a celebration of life's eternal cycle. Each verse sang of dawn's first light, of the gentle rise and fall of the water, and of the countless lives touched by its presence. The words seemed to pulse with quiet power, drawing Menes into a deep reverie. Hours passed as he read, lost in the sacred rhythm of the hymn. When he finally looked up, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that danced across the temple walls. Menes closed the scroll gently, his heart full of gratitude for the gift of these ancient voices. He knew now that his journey was not just one of discovery, but of connection, between past and present, between people and the land, between the seen and the unseen. As twilight descended, Menes stepped outside once again, the cool desert breeze whispering through the palm trees. The river glistened under the moon's soft glow, a silver ribbon weaving its way through the sands. Menes smiled softly, feeling the peaceful embrace of the night. The silent sands had many stories yet to tell, and he was ready to listen with an open heart. The days grew warmer as the sun climbed higher in the sky, yet the desert retained its timeless calm. Menes found comfort in the slow passage of time, in the way the wind stirred the sands and carried faint echoes of the past. One afternoon, as the heat softened the edges of the world, Menes sat beneath the shade of a date palm near the Nile. He held in his hands a small, weathered amulet he had discovered tucked inside an ancient scroll, a symbol carved from bone, worn smooth by centuries of touch. The amulet depicted the eye of Horus, a sign of protection and healing. Menes traced its delicate lines with reverence, feeling a quiet strength emanate from the talisman. Suddenly, a gentle voice broke the stillness. It was Nefret, the village healer, approaching with a calm smile and a basket of fresh figs. She sat beside Menes without a word, sharing the cool fruit as the river whispered nearby. Nefret's presence was a reminder that even in a land of ancient mysteries, human kindness and simple moments of connection endured. Together, they spoke softly about the stories Menes had found, about the sacred river and the timeless wisdom it carried. Nefret told tales passed down by her grandmother, stories of the goddess Isis, who watched over the land and its people with gentle care. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Menes felt a deep sense of belonging. The past and present intertwined like the river's endless flow, each moment a part of the larger story. That night, beneath a canopy of stars, Menes and Nefret lit a small fire by the riverbank. The flames flickered softly, casting dancing shadows as they shared dreams and quiet hopes. In the vast silence of the desert night, the silent sands seemed to breathe with them, a living memory, ancient and everlasting. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint fragrance of blooming lotus flowers drifting from the nearby temple gardens. Menes awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, the amulet's soft glow resting against his chest like a silent promise. Today, he would journey deeper into the vast desert, beyond the familiar boundaries of the village, to a place whispered about in the oldest scrolls, the Valley of Whispers. It was said that there, the winds carried the voices of ancestors, and one might glimpse the secrets of the stars. With careful preparation, Menes set out, the sun rising behind him and casting long shadows over the golden dunes. His steps were steady, each grain of sand a small testament to time's gentle passage. The journey was quiet, filled only with the sound of the wind and the soft crunch of sand beneath his feet. As he walked, Menes thought of the stories he had uncovered, the river's song, the healing power of the Eye of Horus, and the warmth of shared moments with Nefret. Hours passed, and the landscape shifted. Rocky outcrops began to rise like ancient sentinels guarding forgotten truths. The valley lay ahead, bathed in a soft, otherworldly light that seemed to hum with life. Menes paused at the entrance, breathing deeply of the stillness. Here, the air was cooler, and the sand shimmered with a faint, silvery glow. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of centuries pressing gently against his spirit. Inside the valley, the winds whispered softly, carrying fragments of forgotten words, half-remembered songs, and distant laughter. Menes closed his eyes, opening his heart to the voices that had traveled through time to meet him. In that moment, he understood. The silent sands were not silent at all. They spoke in a language beyond words, a quiet melody of life's enduring flow, of memory and hope intertwined. With a peaceful smile, Menes turned back toward home, the secrets of the valley nestled safely within him, ready to be shared when the time was right. As Menes journeyed back through the golden expanse, the sun hung low, casting a soft amber glow over the landscape. The vast desert, once seemingly endless and barren, now felt like a living mosaic of stories and memories stitched together by the whispers of the past. Returning to the village, Menes was greeted warmly by familiar faces, but his mind lingered on the Valley of Whispers. He felt changed, not just by the journey, but by the knowledge that the sands held voices, lessons, and dreams from those who had walked before him. That evening, by the gentle flicker of an oil lamp inside his humble home, Menes began to write. His hands moved carefully, guided by the quiet revelations carried on the desert winds. He chronicled the stories of the river, the healing power of the Eye of Horus, the tales shared by Nefret, and the sacred whispers of the valley. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long, warm shadows over the adobe rooftops of Menes' village. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sweet aroma of lotus flowers from the nearby riverbanks. Villagers moved slowly, their steps unhurried in the soft glow of early light, as if honoring the sacred rhythm of the day. Menes walked through the narrow, dusty streets, clutching his scrolls close. Each step felt purposeful, as though the ground beneath him hummed with ancient energy. Children playing near the fountain stopped and smiled, their innocent laughter a gentle reminder of life's simplicity amid the vastness of time. He made his way to the gathering place, a shaded courtyard beneath a grand date palm, where elders often met to share stories, wisdom, and songs. Today, Menes was invited to speak, a sign of respect and trust earned through his recent journey, and the knowledge he had returned with. Taking a deep breath, Menes unrolled his scroll before the crowd. His voice was soft but steady, weaving the stories of the desert's whispers, the lessons from the Valley of Whispers, and the sacred guidance of Thoth's temple. He spoke of the river's eternal flow, a mirror of life's own ceaseless journey. He described the power of observation, of listening not just with ears, but with the heart. The villagers leaned in, captivated by his words, feeling as though the very earth beneath them stirred with understanding. As the sun reached its zenith, Menes paused, letting silence settle like a gentle breeze. Then, with a calm smile, he invited the villagers to close their eyes and breathe deeply, to feel the pulse of the desert and the warmth of the sun within their own chests. For a long moment, time seemed to still. The only sound was the soft rustle of palm leaves, and the distant call of a hawk soaring high above. When the villagers opened their eyes, they carried with them a quiet peace, a shared connection to the land and to one another. That evening, as stars began to scatter across the deep indigo sky, Menes sat by the fire with his closest friends. They spoke softly of hope, of legacy, and of the timeless beauty found in patience and presence. The desert, with all its silence and secrets, had become a gentle teacher, a keeper of stories that promised to live on in the hearts of those who listened. And so, beneath the vast canopy of night, Menes drifted into sleep, wrapped in the serene embrace of the silent sands. Each word was a bridge between past and present, a thread weaving the timeless tapestry of his people's heritage. As the night deepened, Menes paused to look out the small window, where the stars blinked like ancient eyes watching over the land. The desert's silence was profound, but within it, a symphony of life hummed softly. With a heart full of gratitude and a soul touched by the eternal sands, Menes closed his eyes, ready to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring new stories, new mysteries, and the enduring peace of the silent sands. The dawn crept softly over the horizon, spilling gentle light upon the village nestled against the desert's edge. Menes awoke to the familiar chorus of birdsong, the sweet scent of blooming jasmine drifting through the open window. Today was a day like no other, one destined to deepen the bond between past and present. With the scrolls and writings safely rolled beside him, Menes made his way to the temple of Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. The temple's stone columns stood tall and proud, their carvings whispering stories of gods and mortals, of knowledge passed down through generations. Inside, the air was cool and still, filled with the soft echo of footsteps on worn stone. Menes bowed his head in reverence before the statue of Thoth, his heart filled with hope. Here, he would seek guidance to understand the deeper meaning behind the whispers of the sands. As he traced the intricate hieroglyphs etched into the walls, a gentle breeze stirred the incense, casting delicate shadows that danced like ancient spirits. Menes closed his eyes and listened, letting the quiet wisdom of the temple fill him. In that sacred space, a vision came to him, not in words, but in images. He saw the river flowing strong, the sun's warm embrace on the golden sands, the laughter of children beneath the shade of palm trees, and the eternal cycle of life and renewal. The message was clear: to honor the past is to nurture the future, to listen with open hearts, and to carry forward the light of knowledge and compassion. Filled with newfound clarity, Menes stepped outside, the sunlight warming his face. The village awaited, and with it, the promise of another day to share the silent wisdom of the sands. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Menes awoke with a calmness that had settled deep within his soul. The night's dreams had been filled with visions of the ancient river, its waters glistening under a golden sun, and the quiet wisdom of the gods watching over the land. He rose slowly, savoring the stillness before the day began. Stepping outside, the cool desert breeze greeted him gently, carrying with it the scent of blooming acacia and distant spices from the bustling market. The village was slowly stirring. Merchants laid out their vibrant fabrics and fragrant herbs. Children chased each other with joyous shouts, and elders gathered in small groups, sharing tales of old. Menes made his way toward the temple once more, drawn by an invisible thread of purpose. Along the winding path, the stones beneath his feet seemed to pulse with stories yet untold. He paused to touch the weathered walls of the temple, feeling the coolness of the stone and the presence of countless souls who had come before. Inside, the soft flicker of oil lamps illuminated hieroglyphs that told of healing, balance, and the sacred dance between body and spirit. Menes allowed his fingers to trace the carvings, feeling a connection across centuries. Here lay the wisdom of his ancestors, a gentle reminder that life's true power comes from harmony and understanding. Hours passed unnoticed as Menes sat in quiet meditation, absorbing the tranquility that enveloped the sacred space. When he finally rose, his heart was light, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. He understood now that his journey was not just about uncovering the past, but about nurturing the future for himself, his village, and the generations yet to come. As the sun reached its peak, Menes returned home to share his insights. The villagers gathered eagerly, their faces bright with curiosity and hope. He spoke softly about the importance of patience, kindness, and the steady flow of life's seasons. His words were like a gentle river, flowing smoothly, inviting all to rest in their calm embrace. That evening, beneath a sky awash with stars, meanies and the village elders lit small fires around the gathering place. They sang songs passed down through countless ages, their melodies weaving together like threads of golden light. The night was filled with peace and the quiet certainty that no matter how silent the sands may seem, their whispers carry the timeless truths of life. Meanies closed his eyes, the warmth of the fire and the love of his people wrapping around him like a soft blanket. In the heart of the desert, amidst the endless sands, he found his place, quiet, steady, and eternal. The dawn broke gently over the sprawling desert, casting long, golden shadows that danced across the sands like ancient spirits waking from their slumber. Meanies awoke once more to the subtle hum of life around him, the soft chirping of birds, the distant bleating of goats, and the faint rustling of palm leaves swaying in the morning breeze. Today, Meanies felt a gentle stirring in his heart, a call to explore beyond the familiar paths of his village. The wisdom he had gathered in the temple whispered to him that the world was vast, and within its expanse lay secrets, and stories waiting patiently to be discovered. Yet, this journey would not be rushed. It would be a quiet, mindful wandering, a slow unfolding much like the petals of the lotus flower that bloomed with patient grace. Before setting out, Meanies sat with his mother, a woman whose calm presence was like a steady flame in the desert night. She handed him a small woven pouch filled with fragrant herbs, rosemary, thyme, and a touch of sweet myrrh, gifts meant to soothe the spirit and keep the traveler safe. Her eyes shone with quiet pride and gentle worry, the unspoken blessings carried in the tender touch of her hand. As he stepped beyond the village limits, the familiar sandstone cliffs rose like ancient sentinels, their faces etched with the memories of millennia. Meanies felt the weight and wonder of history in the air, the traces of those who had walked before, who had sought knowledge and peace beneath the same endless sky. His footsteps led him to a small oasis nestled between dunes, a secret haven where crystal-clear water mirrored the cloudless sky. Here, the world seemed to breathe with a slower rhythm, inviting Meanies to pause and reflect. He drank deeply from the spring, feeling the cool liquid refresh his body and calm his mind. The day stretched ahead in peaceful harmony. Meanies explored the vibrant tapestry of life around the oasis, the delicate flowers reaching toward the sun, the graceful movements of dragonflies skimming the water's surface, and the silent watchfulness of the desert fox lurking just beyond the palms. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of soft orange and pink, Meanies found himself beneath a sprawling fig tree. Its ancient branches spread wide, offering shade and comfort. Here, he laid out his simple mat and settled down, allowing his thoughts to drift like the evening breeze. In the quiet of the fading light, Meanies listened to the gentle chorus of the desert, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the steady pulse of his own breath. Each sound was a thread in the fabric of existence, weaving together the past, present, and future into a seamless whole. With a heart full of gratitude and a spirit calm as the still waters, Meanies closed his eyes. The desert night wrapped around him like a soft, endless blanket, carrying him gently into dreams where the whispers of cicada sang lullabies of timeless peace. Beneath the ever-familiar desert moon, the tranquil hush of the Theban night spread like silk across the land. In the distance, the soft murmur of the Nile drifted like a lullaby through the wind-shaped stones, and even the tall papyrus groves seemed to sway slower under its hypnotic hum. Amara stood by the entrance of the Temple of Still Waters, her linen robes whispering softly as she moved. The walls of the temple rose high around her, smooth limestone bathed in the pale gleam of moonlight. Though she had wandered far and visited many temples, this was a place unlike any other, built not for power, but for reflection. No crowds of priests nor pilgrims chanted in this sanctuary. It was a place of silence, and silence had its own kind of power. Tefron, the elderly scribe who had accompanied her since the beginning of her journey, leaned gently on his staff. "Do you hear it?" he asked, his voice no louder than a breath. "Hear what?" Amara turned, her eyes reflecting the quiet torchlight flickering from inside the walls. "The stillness," he replied with a faint smile. "The kind that speaks. Few temples are built to honor quietude, but this one listens." Amara nodded slowly. The weight of her journey pressed on her shoulders, but in this calm, it became easier to carry. The Temple of Still Waters had no central statue, no great idol, no gold-laden altar. Instead, at its heart was a circular basin of water, crystal clear, unmoving, yet somehow alive. Around it, mosaics told stories in soft, flowing curves, stories not of war, but of the quiet victories of wisdom and peace. As they stepped into the inner chamber, the only sound was the echo of their steps. Even those faded away as Amara approached the basin. She gazed into the mirror-like surface and saw not her reflection, but the faces of those she had met. The old woman at the desert edge who gifted her a sunstone. The child who shared a fig beneath the fig tree's shade. The soldier who had walked beside her but never asked for thanks. Tefron sat beside her on the cool stone. "This place is sacred," he murmured. "But not because gods reside here. It is sacred because people bring themselves here, completely, quietly." For a while, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The stars outside blinked slowly, as though they too were drowsy with peace. A gentle breeze swept through the corridor, and the flame of the oil lamp flickered gently in rhythm with the breath of the desert. Then Amara whispered, "What lies ahead, Tefron? I feel we've reached something essential." Tefron didn't answer at once. He dipped a hand into the still water, letting it ripple outward. "The journey ahead is not one of miles but of mind. You came searching for answers, and some you have found. But now comes the real trial, to accept them without seeking more, to rest without chasing, to be still even when the world turns." The idea settled over her like a warm shawl. She exhaled deeply and felt, for the first time in many moons, the tension in her shoulders ease. No longer was she a traveler with a goal. Here, in the Temple of Silence, she was simply Amara, a soul among the sands, allowed to rest. That night, they remained within the temple walls. Kefron curled beneath a woven blanket of camel wool, and Amara lay on a soft mat beneath an open sky. The stars, infinite and ancient, blinked above her. In the distance, the Nile flowed softly, carrying dreams from the southern cataracts to the wide delta. And in her sleep, Amara dreamed of lotus blossoms opening on a morning tide, each petal holding a memory, a whisper, a truth. The journey would continue, but not tonight. Tonight, there was only stillness. The sun's warm glow filtered through the tall date palms as Zahi awoke to the gentle murmuring of the Nile. Its flowing waters hummed with secrets from the past, as though the river itself remembered every whisper spoken along its banks. Today, the air was thick with anticipation. Elder Mena, the guardian of the great papyrus archive, had sent a message, a rare and solemn invitation to visit the sacred chamber that housed the scrolls of ages past. These ancient writings, kept far from the reach of the careless or the curious, held the wisdom of physicians, stargazers, and dreamers. Zahi walked slowly through the reed-lined path toward the temple's east wing, his sandals crunching softly against the sand. Around him, the breeze carried the delicate scent of blue lotus and myrrh. The ibis birds preened along the shore, their white feathers shimmering like ivory in the morning sun. When he arrived, Mena greeted him with a deep bow, his long, linen robe trailing the marble floor. "You have been chosen," Mena said quietly, "to read the scroll of gentle knowledge, the one only read once in a generation." Zahi's breath caught slightly. He had always heard of the scroll, said to contain teachings not of power or war, but of balance, peace, and the gentle art of harmony. Inside the temple, the air shifted to stillness. The walls were carved with winding symbols, lotus blossoms blooming beneath stars, crocodiles swimming peacefully beside men. The architecture itself felt like a lullaby in stone. They entered a circular chamber, dimly lit by oil lamps nestled in golden sconces. In the center lay a papyrus scroll bound in lapis-colored silk. Zahi knelt, his hands reverently untying the cord. The scroll unfurled slowly, revealing ink strokes so delicate they seemed woven from moonlight. It began with a simple line. "Be as the river, for it moves without fear, yet shapes the stone." Zahi read on. The scroll spoke of ancient rhythms, of how a healer must listen not only to the pulse of the sick, but to the hush of night, the sigh of wind through palms, the dreams of a sleeping child. It spoke of plants that healed not only the body but also the spirit, blue lotus for sorrow, chamomile for restless minds, and honey for hearts that had forgotten sweetness. Time melted. Zahi did not feel the hours pass. Outside, the world moved on, but in that chamber, surrounded by words so gentle they felt like a mother's hand on a fevered brow, Zahi was wrapped in a timeless serenity. By evening, as he stepped back into the golden light, Zahi's heart felt changed. Not louder nor faster, just still. As though the scroll had whispered something forgotten into the core of him. That night he returned to the village and sat by the river. The stars began to appear one by one, blinking gently in the indigo sky. Villagers passed by and greeted him, sensing something different in his stillness. "Will you share the scroll's secrets?" asked one elder woman. Zahi smiled softly. "Its wisdom isn't to be told," he said. but to be lived. He turned his gaze to the river. It flowed onward, soft, strong, and sure. And so, beneath a sky so vast it seemed to cradle the earth, the village of Nenu returned to its rhythm. Crickets sang in the reeds, oxen dozed near the water's edge, and the moon, a silver sentinel, began her slow rise above the dunes. The papyrus slept once more within the temple walls, waiting patiently for the next gentle heart who would listen. The days in Nenu passed like the gentle ripples of the Nile, unhurried, golden, full of quiet wonder. After his sacred reading of the scroll of gentle knowledge, Zahi returned to his routines with a peaceful steadiness, though within him something had indeed shifted. He no longer hurried to answer questions or sought to cure ailments with speed. Instead, he moved with the calm wisdom of the river, letting solutions unfold like lotus petals under sunlight. One morning, as the sun lifted above the desert horizon, Elder Mena arrived at Zahi's modest home with a gift unlike any other, a small, flat box wrapped in pale linen. Zahi invited him inside, offering warm spiced tea brewed with hibiscus and fennel. Mena sat down, unwrapped the box, and opened it slowly. Inside lay an ivory amulet shaped like a stylus, etched with the symbol of Seshet, the ancient goddess of wisdom, writing, and architecture. Alongside it was a scroll written in fine demotic script. Zahi lifted the scroll, reading slowly. It was an invitation to the garden of lines and sand, where memory is planted and time flows gently. Walk with silence. Speak with thought. Learn not to know, but to understand. Zahi looked up. The sand garden? He asked quietly. Mena nodded, his expression soft. Few have entered. Even fewer have stayed. But Seshet's garden calls to those whose hearts grow still. That same afternoon, Zahi departed with Mena, walking past the edge of the village, past olive groves and whispering wheat, into the quiet hush of the low eastern desert. As they traveled, the landscape changed. The ground grew smoother, the sand finer, almost like silk beneath their sandals. The air was dry but not harsh, warm, like the breath of ancient stone. Eventually, they reached a modest gate framed by two sandstone columns. Carved upon them were images of stars falling into open books and birds writing with their talons in the sky. Mena did not enter, but bowed. "From here, it is your journey," he said. Zahi nodded, heart serene, and stepped through the gate. Inside, the sand garden of Seshet stretched wide and silent. At first glance, it looked like a sea of raked sand, bordered by low stone walls. But as Zahi walked, he noticed that the garden was not still. It was subtly alive. The sand formed soft paths, gentle spirals, and shifting patterns that seemed to hum with quiet thought. Small stone markers dotted the landscape, some smooth, some etched with symbols, others blank as though waiting for words. There were no trees, no flowers, no ponds, yet the garden pulsed with a presence deeper than form. A silence that listened. Zahi walked among the patterns, sensing that each step mattered. He paused by a curved ridge in the sand and sat. The wind stirred the air, whispering through the shallow grooves like breathed between lines of poetry. As he sat, Zahi began to reflect, not on medicine, or names, or duties, but on quiet things, the shape of a baby's yawn, the soft sigh of sleeping animals, the taste of cool water at dawn. And slowly thoughts softened. His inner voice dimmed, giving way to stillness. Hours passed unnoticed. Days, perhaps. Each morning, Zahi would awaken in the garden, surrounded by warmth and clarity. He spoke aloud, not to himself, but to the garden. He whispered memories of his mother humming lullabies, of patients who healed and those who drifted into the stars. He spoke of fear and of forgiveness. The garden listened without reply. Sometimes, as he walked, he found patterns in the sand had changed, symbols emerging faintly, a shell, a leaf, a pair of outstretched hands. The garden spoke in silence, returning his offerings not in words but in images made of dust and time. One morning, Zahi noticed a stone he hadn't seen before. On it, carved lightly, were these words: "When your mind is quiet, the stars remember you." He placed his hand gently upon the stone. A warmth pulsed there, not heat, but something else. Something like understanding. Something like being seen. From that day, Zahi began to rake the sand himself, not with a tool, but with his fingers, creating spirals that opened like galaxies. He found peace not in answers, but in motion, the sweep of hand through grain, the patient watching of wind undoing his lines. He did not know how long he stayed. One day, under a moon as round as a priest's drum, Zahi stood at the edge of the garden. The patterns behind him swirled gently in the moonlight. He turned to leave. As he stepped back through the gate, Mena was there, older but smiling. They embraced quietly. "You walked the garden," Mena said. "I listened," Zahi replied. They returned to Nenu in silence, the stars above singing a lullaby only the patient could hear. That evening, Zahi lit a lamp by his window and placed the stylus-shaped amulet beside it. He wrote one line in his notebook before resting his head on his pillow. "Even silence teaches, if you listen with stillness." The Nile flowed quietly outside, whispering stories to the night sky. And so the village dreamed on, held gently in the hush of sand and wisdom.